Imagine for a second that you're doing brutal, back-breaking labor on the Amsterdam docks.
Right.
And we're talking about the absolute worst years of the Great Depression here, like the 1930s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, freezing winters.
Exactly. You're sweating through these freezing winters, you're hauling cargo completely by hand, and you are living through one of the most severe economic crises of the 20th century.
Not exactly a glamorous time to be a worker.
No, not at all.
Uh,
But here is the crazy part. Imagine that despite all that undeniable poverty, the harshness of that era, your raw purchasing power.
Like your actual ability to buy things.
Yes, your mathematical ability to buy a family home from a single year's salary was actually higher than an average, highly educated corporate professional sitting in a climate-controlled office in 2024.
I mean, that just sounds like a glitch in the historical record, doesn't it?
It really does.
We are so conditioned by this narrative of modern capitalism, the promise of endless upward mobility.
Right, the idea that every year things just get better.
Exactly. That technology and living standards naturally improve everyone's financial standing over time. So to hear that a manual laborer a century ago had more leverage to secure shelter than a modern middle-class worker today, it's deeply jarring.
It is entirely jarring. And yet, that exact mind-bending comparison is the anchor point for our deep dive today.
Yeah, we have a lot to get through.
We really do. Okay, let's unpack this, because we are looking at a highly critical, incredibly detailed, and politically explosive interview today.
From the YouTube channel Blackbacks.
Yes, Blackbacks. Specifically, we're dissecting a conversation featuring commentator Boris van de Ven alongside another guest named Jan.
And we definitely need to set the boundaries for this discussion right up front.
Absolutely.
Because the material we are dissecting today contains fierce anti-government sentiment. It has strong libertarian arguments and, well, perspectives that aggressively cross traditional political lines.
Yeah, it's an intensely frustrated text.
Very frustrated. It pulls absolutely no punches against the current economic and political establishment in the Netherlands and really Europe at large.
Right. And our mission here is absolutely not to endorse these viewpoints.
No, definitely not.
Nor are we here to debunk them or take a left-wing or right-wing stance against them. We are just here to impartially explore the architecture of their worldview.
We want to dissect the economic mechanics they're describing.
Exactly. We want to understand the deep-seated frustrations driving their arguments and look closely at the structural critiques they present.
Think of it as a forensic examination of a very specific, highly resonant political and economic perspective.
Well said. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it. Because the fascinating thing about this Blackbacks interview is that Boris and Jan do not begin their massive critique with high-level macroeconomic charts.
No, they don't start with abstract monetary theory at all.
They anchor their entire worldview in something incredibly visceral and immediate. Literal garbage on the streets of Amsterdam.
Yes. They start with this incredibly grim picture of localized municipal failure.
It's quite a visual.
It is. They describe a situation where Amsterdam residents face up to 5 weeks of uncollected trash.
5 weeks. Just imagine the smell.
Right. They are talking about mountains of refuse piling up on the sidewalk.
Leading to rat infestations.
Rats, swarms of flies, and just this general feeling among citizens of being completely trapped in their own neighborhoods.
They actually use the phrase third world conditions to describe it.
Which is wild because they are talking about the heart of one of the wealthiest capital cities in Europe.
It's a very deliberate rhetorical strategy on their part.
How so?
Well, they're establishing a baseline of institutional breakdown. You have citizens paying some of the highest municipal taxes in the world.
Right.
And yet, the absolute most primary function of a local government.
Like basic sanitation.
Exactly. Basic sanitation, keeping disease vectors off the streets, it completely freezes up.
People actually became so desperate they were forced to illegally dump their own household waste.
Yeah. But Boris and Jan don't just leave it at the trash. They immediately contrast this primal failure with a hyper-specific, incredibly expensive modern regulation.
Oh, the tethered bottle caps.
Yes.
This is where the contrast really hits home. Because while the physical reality of the city is degrading, Rats running through rotting garbage.
The bureaucratic apparatus is pouring massive societal effort into plastic
Right.
caps.
They mandate that these plastic caps must remain permanently attached to disposable bottles.
And they bring up a study from PricewaterhouseCoopers to highlight the cost.
Yeah, commissioned by the soft drink industry, I think.
Right. And that study estimated that implementing this specific EU regulation cost between 3 and 8 billion euros.
Read 8 billion euros. Just for the caps.
Just for the caps. And the tragic irony they highlight here is that forcing this massive redesign of production lines across the entire continent.
Which is a huge logistical nightmare.
Huge. It allegedly resulted in thousands of tons of additional CO2 emissions and increased plastic usage.
Wait, really?
Yeah, at least in the short term, just to retool all the factories to make the new caps.
So, if I'm understanding their framing here, you have a situation where you're stepping over a pile of rat-infested trash on your way to the grocery store.
Right.
And when you finally buy a bottle of water, the government has spent billions of euros ensuring you can't drop the cap.
That is the exact juxtaposition they are making.
It's like, okay, imagine checking into what you were told is a 5-star luxury resort.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You pay this exorbitant nightly rate.
Yeah.
You get to your room, and there is raw sewage backing up out of the bathroom drain.
Lovely.
Right? But instead of fixing the plumbing, the hotel management sends up a team of white-gloved staff to meticulously place a highly regulated, ethically sourced, wildly expensive organic chocolate on your pillow.
While completely ignoring the smell of the sewage.
Exactly.
That is exactly the sensation of institutional gaslighting that Boris and Jan are trying to articulate.
Okay, that makes sense.
The term they actually use for this is symbolpolitik.
Symbolic politics.
Right. It's the feeling that the state is ignoring the physical deterioration of the country while obsessively focusing on performative, microscopic details of environmental or social compliance.
But hold on. I have to push back on their logic here for a second.
Go for it.
Aren't those tethered bottle caps a European Union mandate? Like, that directive came down from Brussels.
Yes, it did.
Whereas the trash collection is strictly a local municipal issue handled by the Amsterdam City Council.
Correct.
So isn't Boris just conflating two completely different, unrelated levels of government to construct a convenient narrative?
From a strict administrative and legal standpoint, you were absolutely right.
Right, because they are entirely different jurisdictions.
But Boris and Jan aren't writing a textbook on European administrative law here. They are diagnosing what they see as a systemic cultural rot.
Oh, I see.
To the average citizen walking down the street, it's all just the government.
It's just the state.
Exactly. The bottle cap is utilized as a symbol of misplaced bureaucratic priorities that infects every level of governance, from the local council all the way up to the European Parliament.
So the underlying argument is that the entire apparatus of the state has insulated itself from the tangible reality of its citizens.
Yes. The bureaucracy is busy solving theoretical, abstract problems while the foundational physical reality crumbles.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about the lived experience of the citizen, not the flowchart of government agencies.
Exactly.
And this feeling of local degradation, this visceral sense that things are physically falling apart and the social contract is fraying, it acts as the perfect runway for them to take off to their core macroeconomic argument.
Right, because if the garbage is the visible symptom of the rot, we need to talk about what they view as the invisible disease.
You're referring to inflation.
Yes, which they frame not just as an economic phenomenon, but as a silent eraser of wealth.
A silent eraser. I like that phrasing. And this brings us back to that mind-bending harbor worker comparison we opened with.
Right, let's dig into those numbers.
So the Blake Flex interview pulls data from Statistics Netherlands, the CBS.
Okay.
According to this historical data, an Amsterdam harbor worker in the 1930s earned roughly 996 guilders a year.
Which doesn't sound like much.
No, but if you take that 996 guilders and adjust it purely for inflation to the year 2024, it equals about 42,000 euros.
42,000. And then they drop the hammer on the modern economy.
Yeah, they do.
They take that inflation-adjusted figure of 42,000 euros and compare it to the 2024 modal, or average, salary in the Netherlands.
Which sits at roughly 38,000 euros.
Which leads Boris to this massive structural conclusion. He says society has fundamentally grown poorer since the crises of the previous century.
He is literally arguing that a single blue-collar worker in the 1930s had more raw purchasing power than the average modern professional working today.
And we have to look very closely at how they explain the mechanics of this poverty.
Why is that?
Because when you and I usually talk about inflation, or when we hear about it on the evening news, it's framed almost like bad weather.
Oh, yeah. Like groceries are up 20% or gas prices are spiking due to supply chain.
Exactly. We treat it as a temporary condition that just happens to us.
Right.
But Boris and Jan reframe inflation for the listener as a fundamental, orchestrated devaluation of the currency itself,
Orchestrated by who?
driven by the financial system.
And they apply this directly to the housing crisis, don't they?
They do, which is the ultimate pain point for anyone trying to build a life right now.
Yeah, tell me about it. Boris makes this crucial distinction. He argues that houses aren't suddenly worth 1.5 million euros because the houses themselves are intrinsically better.
Right. It's not like the bricks got stronger.
Or like every house suddenly spawned a self-cleaning bathroom and a magical new kitchen.
Right. The physical asset, the shelter itself, hasn't changed.
So what has changed?
The measuring stick we use to value it has changed. The euro has simply lost its purchasing power.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of the housing market like a pizza.
Okay, I like pizza.
Imagine it's the year 1930. The economy has exactly 8 slices of pizza representing all the money, and there are 8 people who each want to buy a house.
Simple enough. One slice per person.
Fast forward to today. The physical number of houses hasn't drastically outpaced the population. But the central banks and the financial system have taken those exact same 8 slices of pizza and sliced them into 80,000 microscopic slivers.
Oh, wow.
And they hand those slivers out to everyone. The pizza didn't get more valuable. Your individual slice just got drastically, hopelessly smaller.
And they place the blame for this relentless slicing of the pizza squarely on the banking sector.
Yes, they specifically target the mechanism of how mortgages are issued.
Right, they use this Dutch phrase, saying banks create money it's in null.
Out of thin air.
Right.
This is a direct critique of fractional reserve banking and credit creation.
How does that work in this context?
Well, when you go to a bank for a 400,000 euro mortgage, the bank doesn't go down to a vault and pull out 400,000 euros that other people have diligently saved.
They don't.
No. In the modern financial system, the bank literally creates that credit on a ledger at the exact moment you sign the contract.
So they just conjure that purchasing power out of nothing.
Exactly. By injecting hundreds of thousands of newly created euros into the housing market every time a house is sold, the sheer volume of money competing for the exact same number of bricks and mortar skyrockets.
So if everyone suddenly has access to €500,000 of debt created out of thin air, the seller just raises the price of the house to €500,000.
Exactly. And the currency you earn from your actual physical labor buys less and less of that asset.
Okay, hold on though. I really struggle with this 1930s comparison on a practical level.
I thought you might.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the math on that 996 guilders perfectly equals 42,000 euros today. But let's be real about the 1930s harbor worker. He was doing bone-crushing manual labor.
True.
He didn't have access to modern antibiotics. A minor infection could literally be a death sentence.
Absolutely.
He didn't have a refrigerator, the internet, cheap international flights, or modern workplace safety regulation.
No, he did not.
The sheer leap in human living standards, life expectancy, and medical technology over the last 90 years is just staggering.
It's massive.
So isn't Boris just cherry-picking the one single mathematical metric that makes the past look good, while totally ignoring the massive realities of human progress?
That is a completely fair critique of the historical comparison.
Thank you.
The quality of life, the medical access, the technological convenience, those things are light years ahead of the 1930s. We can't deny that.
Right.
But if we impartially analyze what Boris is actually trying to say here, he isn't arguing that we should give up antibiotics and go back to hauling coal.
Okay, so what is he arguing?
He is focusing strictly on the concept of leverage, the mathematical leverage of a single human's labor.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Mm-hmm.
What does the leverage of labor actually mean for someone listening to this deep dive today?
It means the ability of one unit of your time and effort to secure basic, independent physical survival.
Like shelter, food, warmth.
Exactly. Boris's point is that in the 1930s, one working-class salary, despite the lack of modern amenities, could literally purchase a family home and support a spouse and children.
Right.
Today, he argues that fundamental baseline is mathematically impossible for the average single earner.
That's sadly very true.
You need dual incomes. You often need to be heavily supplemented by generational wealth or parental gifts just to get a basic foothold in the property market.
Yeah.
So while you might hold a supercomputer in your pocket and have access to MRI machines, the foundational milestone of financial independence, owning the roof over your head purely through your own daily labor, has been erased.
Wow.
That is the specific poverty they are describing. You are financially trapped in a system that requires more and more labor just to stand still.
When you frame it as the leverage of your time versus the cost of hard assets,
Yeah,
that is a deeply unsettling perspective.
it is.
It basically means the treadmill is speeding up, but the destination is getting further and further away.
That's a great way to put it.
So if inflation is this invisible eraser, constantly grinding down the value of the euros sitting in your bank account, what happens to the person who realizes this?
The person who tries to escape.
Right. What happens to the person who tries to beat the system, who saves diligently and invests their money so it grows faster than inflation?
According to the Blackfix interview, that brings us directly into what they view as the ultimate trap.
The ultimate trap.
Mm,
Here's where it gets really interesting.
yes. Because if we accept their premise that the money's broken, where does that leave the citizen trying to save for their future?
It leads to their intense fury directed at the tax system.
Exactly. Specifically, the new Dutch wealth tax on unrealized gains, known as Box 3, or the vermogensaanwasbelasting.
Now, this is where the conventional political narrative gets completely flipped on its head.
Oh, completely.
Usually when politicians talk about wealth taxes, it is framed as a matter of fairness. The narrative is that we need to tax the ultra-rich, the billionaires hoarding massive resources, to level the playing field.
Right, that's the standard pitch.
But Boris and Jan argue the exact opposite. They claim this specific tax actually protects the billionaires while aggressively gutting the middle class.
Yes, they do.
How on earth do they justify that claim mechanically? Like, how does a wealth tax protect a billionaire?
They justify it by dissecting the fatal mechanical flaw of taxing unrealized gains. And it all comes down to liquidity.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's walk through the hypothetical scenario they construct. Imagine a true billionaire. They have a massive, mature portfolio of real estate, blue chip stocks, and private equity.
Okay, got it.
On January 1st, their net worth is exactly 1 billion euros. On December 31st, after a totally flat year in the markets, their net worth is still exactly 1 billion euros.
Yeah.
Under a tax system that only targets growth or gains, the anners, that billionaire pays absolutely zero wealth tax on their billion-euro hoard.
Zero.
Right.
Because there was no growth. Their wealth is vast, but it is static.
Precisely. Now, contrast that static billionaire with a dynamic middle-class citizen.
Yeah.
Imagine you are a small investor. You've managed to save a little bit of money from your salary, and you invest it.
Trying to beat that inflation treadmill.
Exactly. Maybe you start a small tech portfolio, or you just get a lucky break in the market. Over the course of the year, your investments surge, and your small savings grow by 100,000 euros on paper.
On paper being the key phrase there.
Exactly. You haven't sold the stocks, you haven't cashed out, the money is still sitting in the market.
Right.
But under this new Box 3 system, the government looks at your account on December 31st, sees that 100,000 euro gain, and says, you owe us roughly 36,000 euros in taxes.
But wait, if I haven't sold the stock, I don't have 36,000 euros in cash sitting in my checking account to pay the tax authority.
And that is the exact mechanism that Boris and Jan are screaming about. The liquidity trap.
Because I don't have the cash.
Right. Because you don't have the cash, the government effectively forces you to sell off a massive portion of your own assets just to pay the tax on the paper gains.
You are literally cannibalizing your own wealth just to maintain it.
Exactly. They compare it directly to a casino, which is such a vivid way to understand the volatility aspect of this.
How does the casino analogy work?
They say investing under an unrealized gains tax is like walking into a casino, putting your chips on red 3 times in a row, and winning.
Nice.
But before you can even cash out your chips, the government steps in and takes a 36% cut of the chips sitting right there on the table.
That grabs them.
Yep. And then if you leave the remaining chips on the table and the next spin lands on black, you lose everything.
But the government keeps the cut they already took.
Exactly, because markets fluctuate. If your stock portfolio skyrockets artificially in December, you are taxed on that absolute highest watermark, even if the entire market crashes the very next week in January.
Man, this is where their economic critique really morphs into a narrative of intentional entrapment.
Intentional entrapment is a good way to phrase it.
Boris argues that investing is the only viable emergency exit out of a system defined by structural inflation.
Right, you have to invest.
If the central banks are printing money and your purchasing power is evaporating, you must put your money into assets that appreciate, like stocks or real estate, just to survive.
Otherwise, you just lose.
Right. So by placing exorbitant taxes on the volatile gains of those investments, the state is effectively locking the emergency exit.
They are locking the door.
They are ensuring that you cannot invest your way out of the middle class. You are trapped in the burning building of inflation. And the only people who are safe are the ones who already own the entire building.
Which brings Jan into the conversation with a deeply ethical, almost philosophical angle on taxation.
And Jan doesn't mince his words at all.
No, he doesn't. He looks at this system, the inflation, the forced asset sales, and he describes modern taxation point blank as organized theft.
Organized theft. That's strong.
Jan represents a very pure libertarian ethical framework within this interview. He argues for a radical, almost utopian simplification of the social contract between the citizen and the state.
What does that look like?
His core belief is that there should only be one single tax event in a person's economic life.
Just one.
Income tax. You contribute your fair share at the exact moment you earn the money from your labor, and from that point forward, the state has absolutely no further claim on your property.
He is incredibly specific about this. He explicitly calls for the total abolition of the BTW, the VAT or sales tax.
Yes.
And he is particularly furious about the inheritance tax, the earth-belasting.
The inheritance tax is the ultimate friction point for their worldview.
Why is that the ultimate friction point?
Jan argues that the only way to build true societal stability is to allow families to accumulate generational wealth. If you look at the life cycle of a euro under the current system, you are taxed when you earn it. You are taxed on the paper gains when you invest it. You are taxed via VAT when you spend it to buy goods.
It never ends.
And then, whatever is left over, the money that has already been taxed 3 or 4 times, is taxed yet again when you die and try to pass it on to your children.
So to Jan and Boris, this is not a system of civic contribution.
No, to them, it is indicative of a predatory state designed to systematically strip mine families of capital so they remain permanently dependent on their daily labor.
And this resentment culminates in one of the most provocative historical analogies in the entire interview.
Oh, the Egypt analogy.
Yes, Jan actually claims that the slaves of the pharaohs in ancient Egypt had a better economic deal than the modern Dutch taxpayer.
It's quite a statement.
Wait, are we seriously comparing the modern Dutch tax system, which funds high-speed rail, universal healthcare, and public schools, to actual literal slavery under the pharaohs?
I know, it's intense.
That is a massive rhetorical leap that feels designed purely to offend rather than analyze.
It is a deliberate provocation, without question. They are using extremely polarized imagery to shock the listener out of complacency.
Okay, but what's the logic?
If we deconstruct the economic mechanic behind the analogy, rather than the moral equivalence, here's what they are pointing at. They state that the agricultural slaves in ancient Egypt were required to give up roughly 20% of their crop yield to the pharaoh.
Keeping the remaining 80% to survive and feed their families.
Right.
Okay, so 20% flat tax on production.
Right. Now, Jan points to the modern Dutch citizen. When you combine the top marginal income tax rates, the 21% VAT on almost everything you buy, municipal taxes, energy taxes, and wealth taxes,
That adds up fast.
the total marginal tax burden on a citizen's labor and capital can easily exceed 50, 60, or even 70%.
Wow.
The economic point they're trying to make is that modern citizens are experiencing a sanitized form of economic servitude.
Economic servitude.
Yes. The sovereign power automatically seizes the vast majority of your productive output before you even see it, leaving you with just enough residual capital to pay your immediate bills, subsist, and return to work the next day.
They're arguing that the rate of extraction is historically unprecedented.
Exactly.
It is a devastating, incredibly cynical critique of the social contract. But it begs a massive, unavoidable question.
Which is,
If all of this wealth is being extracted, if the middle class is being systematically strip-mined by this invisible erasure of inflation and this gauntlet of taxation, where do Boris and Jan think all this money is actually going?
follow the money.
Because as we established at the very beginning of the deep dive, The streets of Amsterdam are not paved with gold.
No, they're literally paved with uncollected garbage.
Exactly, the money isn't flowing into basic services.
Well, if we follow their logic to its next stage, they argue that the wealth extracted from the productive economy is being entirely absorbed by a massive, completely unproductive bureaucratic layer.
A bureaucracy.
They describe the modern European state as a politic Waterhoofd, a political hydrocephalus.
What does that mean?
A bloated, swollen head that consumes all the resources but is completely disconnected from the productive body of the actual economy.
And they drop a statistic to support this that honestly made me do a double take.
The 50% stat.
Yes. The claim is that over 50% of the working Dutch population works directly or indirectly for the government.
It's a huge claim.
Let me pause here. Claiming that half of the entire workforce of a major European economy is essentially on the government payroll seems statistically impossible if we were just talking about civil servants.
Right, if you just count the ministries.
How broadly are they defining indirectly working for the government to possibly reach a number that staggering?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to get anywhere near that 50% mark, you have to look far beyond the bureaucrats sitting in the ministries in The Hague.
Okay, so who else is included?
The Blockbeck's interview is sweeping in absolutely anyone whose income relies fundamentally on state funding, government subsidies, or legislative mandates.
Anyone.
Think about a typical town. You aren't just counting the mayor and the tax collectors. You are counting the entire massive healthcare apparatus, which is heavily regulated and subsidized.
Okay, that's a lot of people.
You are counting the entire education system from kindergarten teachers to university professors. You are counting the public broadcasting networks.
Right.
You are counting the thousands of heavily subsidized NGOs and climate initiatives.
Wow.
And crucially, you are counting the massive consultancy class. Private firms, lawyers, and compliance officers whose entire business model exists only to help other companies navigate the labyrinth of government regulations.
Ah, so if you run a supposedly private consulting firm, but your only major client is advising the city council on how to implement the tethered bottle cap mandate,
Right.
Boris and Jan view you not as a private entrepreneur, but as a parasitic extension of the government apparatus.
Precisely. You are consuming tax euros without producing a tangible good or an essential service.
And they take this concept even further by invoking the idea of bullshit jobs.
Which echoes the work of the late anthropologist David Graeber.
Right. He argued that modern society has created countless administrative roles that are completely pointless, even to the people doing them.
Exactly. John and Boris are pointing at the same sociological phenomenon. They argue that a vast segment of these state-funded roles produce absolutely nothing of tangible value for society.
They're just administrative make-work.
Make work designed to keep people occupied. The specific example they highlight is a city guard, a stadswacht, or a municipal supervisor making 5,000 euros gross a month.
Okay.
In their worldview, this is not legitimate employment. They view this as a de facto universal basic income disguised as a job and funded entirely by the taxes extracted from the truly productive sector.
The builders, the farmers, the engineers, the small business owners.
Exactly.
They are essentially saying the state has created a shadow welfare system by inventing bureaucratic jobs.
Yes.
And the frustration really boils over when they contrast the accountability of this bureaucratic class with the accountability of the average citizen.
The double standard.
They bring up Hugo de Jonge, a prominent Dutch politician who was involved in the government's pandemic response.
Right.
The source references an auditing scandal where billions of euros, they cite 5 billion, could not be properly accounted for with receipts during the procurement of medical supplies.
The contrast they draw here is designed to highlight a two-tiered society.
How so?
They compare that mind-boggling lack of accountability at the top of the political pyramid with the microscopic, punitive scrutiny applied to the regular taxpayer at the bottom.
Oh, I see.
Think about it. If a small business owner misplaces a receipt for a 50-euro business lunch, the tax authority will hunt them down, audit them, and fine them.
Without hesitation.
But a government minister oversees the administrative disappearance of 5 billion euros, and there are virtually no personal or financial consequences.
The system protects its own.
Exactly. This fuels their narrative that the ruling class operates with total impunity while ruthlessly policing the productive class.
And this anger extends beyond domestic bureaucracy. The resentment peaks when the interview shifts to international spending.
The vrijheidsbidrag.
Right, what politicians often refer to as the freedom contribution. This is the rhetoric used to
Hmm.
justify sending billions in military aid or increasing defense spending to support foreign conflicts like the war in Ukraine.
Boris and Jan fiercely criticized this.
One of the speakers actually uses the term mass murder contribution, claiming this money doesn't buy freedom, it just funds endless war.
It is intensely charged, highly provocative language, but again, look at the underlying mechanic of their argument.
What are you getting at?
They connect this massive international spending directly to domestic political maneuvering. They allege that the Netherlands is so eager to pay these billions in international contributions, not out of deeply held moral conviction, but simply to buy political favors on the global stage.
Political favors, like what?
They explicitly suggest that figures like former Prime Minister Mark Rutte champion these massive geopolitical expenditures using taxpayer money in order to secure prestigious international jobs for themselves.
Like becoming the Secretary General of NATO.
Precisely.
It's the ultimate cynical view of the state. The government isn't protecting democracy, it's extracting wealth from you under the emotional guise of freedom, while actually just funding the career advancements and legacy building of the political elite.
They describe this current era of politics as the loot the treasury phase.
Loot the treasury phase. It's a very dark metaphor.
They are suggesting that the European economy is in a late-stage parasitic phase.
The insiders know the system is fundamentally insolvent, so they're just grabbing whatever isn't nailed down before the whole thing collapses.
Right. They cite examples like massive wind farm subsidies mysteriously ending up in the hands of a politician's relatives.
It is a portrait of a system in terminal decline.
It is.
However, as deep dive analysts, it is crucial that we point out a moment of internal nuance within the source material itself.
Yes, it's not totally one-sided.
The interview is not entirely a monolith of despair. There is another voice in the room, Paul, who actually pushes back against Jan and Boris's blanket condemnation of the public sector.
Right. Paul acts as a bit of a moderating force.
He defends the subsidized sectors,
Right.
specifically highlighting education and healthcare as being highly productive and essential to a functioning society.
He acknowledges that bullshit jobs exist and that the bureaucracy is bloated, but he refuses to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
He doesn't view every single teacher and nurse as a parasite.
Which is a vital bit of nuance. It shows that even within this highly critical echo chamber, there is a debate about the scale of the rot, even if they all agree the rot exists.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together.
Let's do it.
We have streets full of garbage. We have inflation secretly destroying the purchasing power of the middle class. We have a tax system that traps you if you try to invest. And we have a bloated, unaccountable bureaucracy siphoning off the wealth.
That's the picture they've painted.
If the economic foundations of society are truly this cracked, you would assume that traditional politics, the democratic process, would step in and offer a solution.
You would hope so.
But Boris makes an incredibly sweeping observation about the political landscape. He suggests that the traditional political spectrum hasn't just failed, it has completely warped out of recognition.
Yes. If we accept the reality they have painted, the obvious question is, where is the political left?
Right.
Historically, the left-wing parties were the champions of the working class. They were the ones fighting for that 1930s harbor worker.
So why aren't they stepping in to stop the financialization of housing and the extraction of wealth?
This brings us to what political scientists call the horseshoe theory, which Boris and Jan embrace wholeheartedly to explain the current political realignment.
I love discussing the horseshoe theory. For those unfamiliar, it's the idea that the political spectrum isn't a straight line from left to right.
No, it's bent.
Instead, it's bent like a horseshoe, meaning that the extreme far left and the extreme far right actually bend toward each other and share more in common than they do with the centrist establishment in the middle.
Exactly. And Boris points out that if you look at classic left-wing ideals from 20 or 30 years ago.
Things like advocating for a strict peace policy, being inherently suspicious of NATO and military-industrial complexes,
Demanding base-level direct democracy.
and being highly critical of big pharma and mega corporations.
Those exact talking points are now championed almost exclusively by right-wing populist parties.
It's crazy how that flipped.
In the Dutch context, they point to parties like Forum voor Democratie or the PVV.
Exactly. The script is totally flipped. Boris claims that if you put the economic programs of the far-left Socialist Party, the SP, and the far-right Populist Party, the PVV, side by side, they are functionally identical.
They're both speaking directly to the disenfranchised harbor worker, offering protectionist policies and a return to national sovereignty.
Meanwhile, The traditional establishment left and green parties, like Groenlings, are completely dismissed by the speakers.
They call them fake green and fake left.
They argue that these parties have abandoned the working class entirely and now only cater to the ultra-rich, the urban laptop class, and the bureaucratic elite.
The very people who hold assets and actually benefit from the inflation and the symbolic environmental policies.
What Boris is describing here is a massive structural class realignment.
It is. The political battle is no longer defined by traditional 20th century ideology. It's no longer Marxist versus capitalist.
So what is it?
It has become entirely about insiders versus outsiders. It is the ruling bureaucratic class who are insulated from the consequences of their policies versus the squeezed, productive middle class who bear the entire cost.
And to explain why the leadership class seems so blind to this reality, the interview maps this realignment onto a broader, almost fatalistic view of history known as the generational cycle theory.
Ah, the Strauss-Howe generational theory.
It's been memified on the internet for years, usually summarized as strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men.
It's the idea that history moves in predictable four-stage cycles based on the complacency that wealth breeds.
And Boris takes this theory incredibly seriously. He applies it directly to the current political leadership.
He explicitly names current centrist politicians, like Henri Bontembal.
Right. And he categorizes them as the weak men who are currently managing the creation of hard times.
He argues that because these politicians grew up entirely during the good times of post-Cold War prosperity and endless credit expansion, they are fundamentally incapable of making the brutal structural changes needed to save the economy.
They don't know how to navigate a real crisis because they've never experienced one.
They just keep forming endless committees and proposing minor tax tweaks while the ship is sinking.
But that raises another question. If the politicians are weak, what about the citizens?
Yeah, where is the outrage?
If the middle class is being systematically wiped out, why aren't people rioting in the streets? Why is there no massive societal pushback?
The interview dives into the psychology of the public to answer this. Boris claims that the general population is mur.
Mur, the Dutch word translates roughly to numb, exhausted, or beaten down.
They argue that willful ignorance has become a societal defense mechanism.
Well, that makes sense.
The average citizen intuitively feels that the system is failing. They feel the panic when they look at their grocery bill. They feel the despair when they realize they will never be able to buy a house.
But confronting the reality of a total systemic economic collapse is simply too terrifying.
So they retreat into the safety of the familiar.
Like what?
The interview claims that people cling to legacy media. They turn on the evening talk shows, they read the establishment newspapers, consuming what Boris bluntly calls bullshit.
Not because they necessarily believe it.
No, but because the narrative that everything is fine and the experts have it under control is comforting. Waking up to the alternative, that the currency is dying and the politicians are clueless, is too psychologically painful to endure.
So it's like a massive political game of musical chairs.
How so?
The left and the right have completely swapped seats, the bureaucracy has eaten all the snacks, and the music is slowing down. But instead of fighting for a chair, everyone is just closing their eyes and pretending they don't hear the silence approaching.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. But Boris doesn't just stop at diagnosing a numb, complacent public. This brings us to the climax of the interview, where he takes his economic theories to an absolutely apocalyptic conclusion.
He looks at the inflation, the taxes, and the numbness, and he predicts imminent hyperinflation.
And he issues a stark, terrifying warning. He says that if the current trajectory continues and the middle class is totally wiped out, the country is going to face a Weimar Germany scenario.
Weimar Germany. The infamous hyperinflation of the 1920s, where wheelbarrows of cash were needed to buy a loaf of bread, which ultimately destroyed the German middle class and directly paved the way for the rise of the Nazi Party.
It is the most extreme historical comparison you can possibly make in a European context.
Well, let's break this down mechanically. What exactly is the bridge that Boris builds between a frustrating modern wealth tax on stock portfolios and the total societal and democratic collapse of a stable European nation?
This raises an important question. The bridge connecting those two realities is the concept of desperation.
Desperation.
If you look at the mechanics of why Weimar Germany collapsed, it wasn't just that the money lost its value, it was the psychological consequence of that loss.
Right.
Boris argues that the current policies, the inflation, the Box 3 taxes on unrealized gains, are actively closing the exits for the middle class.
The social contract of a democracy relies on the idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, you will gain a stake in society.
You will own a home, you will have a pension.
But when a highly educated, industrialized population suddenly realizes that hard work no longer results in ownership and that their life savings are evaporating due to central bank policies, they lose their stake in the system.
They realize the game is rigged, and they have absolutely nothing left to lose.
Precisely. And the historical precedent of Weimar is invoked to show what happens to a democracy when the middle class is economically eradicated.
The warning is this: a desperate public, stripped of their assets, their savings, and their future, will not politely turn to moderate centrist politicians asking for a 2% tax cut.
They will become radicalized.
They will turn to extreme figures who offer radical authoritarian solutions. They will willingly embrace a strongman who promises to punish the elites, crush the bureaucracy, and restore order, no matter the cost to democratic norms or civil liberties.
It's a chilling warning about the inevitable catastrophic political consequences of ignoring economic despair. It's not just about money. It's about the survival of the democratic system itself.
And Boris's final piece of advice to the listener, standing on the edge of this predicted hyperinflation and collapse, is incredibly visceral.
He doesn't say, make sure you vote for a different political party next election.
No, he tells the audience to buy concrete assets, buy food, buy energy. Secure your physical, localized survival because the paper economy, the euros, the stocks, the pensions is going to zero.
It is the ultimate expression of zero institutional trust. He is advising a retreat into pure individual survivalism.
Yeah.
In his view, the social contract hasn't just been bent, it has been entirely irreversibly breached by the state.
Wow. Okay, take a deep breath.
We have covered a massive, intense amount of ground today.
From literal garbage on the streets to the mechanics of fractional reserve banking to the liquidity traps of wealth taxes, all the way to the apocalyptic warnings of Weimar Germany.
I want to bring all of this back to you listening to this deep dive right now. Why does this hour we just spent unpacking the Black Rick's interview matter to your life?
Whether you agree with every single word Boris and Jan said, or whether you find their economic conclusions radically pessimistic, borderline conspiracy, or just factually flawed, this text is incredibly important.
Because it serves as a fascinating, raw blueprint for understanding modern political reality.
It shows exactly how modern economic anxiety, the inability to buy a house, the shock of inflation every time you go to the grocery store, the overwhelming frustration of complex, punitive taxes breeds deep, systemic institutional distrust.
It is a masterclass in understanding the architecture of modern populist frustration.
It shows how the inability of a local government to pick up the trash can philosophically connect in a citizen's mind to global geopolitical defense spending and the macroeconomic monetary policies of the European Central Bank.
In this worldview, it's all one interconnected web of alienation and extraction.
Exactly. It explains the undercurrent of anger that is completely reshaping elections, not just in the Netherlands, but across the entire globe right now. People are voting based on this exact feeling of being trapped.
And so, we want to leave you with a brand new concept to ponder as you go about your day, building off that horseshoe theory we discussed earlier.
If the traditional political spectrum has truly bent into a horseshoe, rendering the old 20th century terms left and right completely meaningless in describing how people actually live and vote,
What is the new dividing line in our society?
is the future political battleground no longer about ideology at all?
Are we rapidly moving toward a world where the only conflict that truly matters is simply the asset holders?
The people who already own the houses, the mature stock portfolios, the tangible wealth that survives inflation.
Versus the assetless, the people entirely dependent on a depreciating fiat currency and the whims of a massive bloated state.
It suggests a dividing line that is not based on what moral values you believe in, but purely on what physical assets you manage to acquire before the door slams shut.
And if that is true, how does a modern peaceful democracy survive when half the population realizes they are permanently locked out of the casino?
Something heavy to chew on.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly intense journey today. Keep questioning, keep exploring the mechanisms behind the headlines, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.